there's one of the characters in the novel, the principal speculator, a guy by the name of William Dewar, who was a real historical figure. He managed to get the Congress to grant him huge lots of land, and then he would sell these parcels to veterans and others, but in part to veterans who, in exchange for their debt, because he was very close to Hamilton, and he knew Hamilton wanted to try to assume all the outstanding debt. And so people were buying this debt for pennies on the dollar, or in Dewar's case, he was getting, trading it for something he got for free. And then the hope was that eventually the debt would be made good and he would make a lot of money, which is exactly what happened. And this woman and her husband, I don't want to say too much about it because it's fairly pivotal, but terrible things happen to them on the frontier. And much of what happens is the direct or indirect result of the excise tax on whiskey that Hamilton was using to fund the Bank of the United States. And so she vows revenge on the bank and on Hamilton.
Well, she's making whiskey. I mean, so it directly impacts her, and that this tax is in the way of her, what she is, doing to make a living for her family.
Yeah, the problem with the tax was that it, out on the western frontier, where they had no way of trading their goods back east because there were no good roads between east and west, and they couldn't trade it further west because the Spanish would not allow navigation of the Mississippi. There was nothing to do with their crops. They couldn't trade them. They were non-tradable goods, and so the best way to preserve it was to make whiskey out of it.
Which was a staunch Scotch tradition anyway.
Yes, and then you had this whiskey, and whiskey became basically a currency. It was a barter. It was a barter.
Did they have
economy.
much in the way of instruments of commerce anyway? I mean, it wasn't really. You weren't like writing checks and doing a lot of that, were you?
No, I mean it's. I would in the book we talk about. I talk a lot about how I'll give you $40 worth of pounds. So the concept of dollar is out there. But the real money that people have in their hand is often British money or Spanish money or some other kind of foreign coin, and so people would know off the top of their head how many dollars a pound was worth, and so on. But there was a real shortage of currency, and that's another problem that happens at the time, but that I don't get into too much. But this was Hamilton's great project, that he has this new country that's saddled with all this debt and doesn't have a sufficient financial or commercial engine, and he's doing everything in his power to rectify that.
So Ben Bernanke, is he in kind of a similar in some ways situation with the mess we have? Credit problems in the system,
Well, I think the difference is that in many ways Hamilton was handed, if not a clean slate, at least a kind of an unformed slate, and he could shape it. And he was in this position where he could shape it in any way he wished, and he really had the intelligence and the imagination to try and create this modern financial environment in this new country. Whereas today what we have is just a big mess. I mean, it's the difference between walking into an empty room and imagining what you would like to do with it, and walking into a room that's been hit by a tornado and imagining how you want to fix it.
Well, it is fascinating that your book has come out just at kind of a big bullet moment. But I have often said to people that one of the reasons that I have spent a lifetime addicted to crime fiction is because I have this kind of ragbag mind, and I just love to learn stuff. Lots of it not particularly useful, but I'm just always fascinated with learning things. And your books probably have provided me with all I know about economics and economic systems, because it doesn't really interest me that much.
Well, I think most people feel that way, and how economics affects people's lives, how these financial upheavals, how these stock upheavals affect people's lives is fascinating to me.
Totally.
But I'm not that interested in economics either, so the information is hard won because I have to read all the boring books in order to try and distill out what makes these things interesting to people.
Well, you've obviously done a really ace job. And the other thing is, because it's back in time a bit, and it's not, it's not immediate, and because the stage is smaller, even if just as significant for the people living under it, it's easier to understand.
Right. I think that's right. You know, right now, one of the issues that we're dealing with are these financial instruments that are so complicated that literally almost nobody understands
Absolutely.
them.
My eyes just glaze over
You know,
trying to read the
that-
paper
that
about it.
I'm not even sure the people who design them fully understand them. And whereas, you know, when you talk about these things in a much more scaled down environment, I think it's easier to get a handle on what's going on, why these things happen, why traders make the sort of bad mistakes that they make, what kind of traps they fall into, and then you can project that onto the modern world. It's with, say, oh, it's that, only, you know, much more complicated or much more high powered.
Well, and I haven't mentioned, and we're out of time, so I'll say it really quickly. I haven't mentioned the fact that you're great on characterization, you're terrific on landscape and what all, and the fiction makes it come alive in a way that if you were writing history or newspaper reports or something, just wouldn't have any life. And I do think that information that comes to you with fiction sticks, because the play of the characters and the way the story goes kind of cements it into your head. At least that's how it works for me.
I really feel that primarily when you're a historical novelist, that you're a novelist first, and that these things, a novel is an entertainment about characters who have faced obstacles that they need to overcome, and it should be engaging, and it should be fun, and it should be a story that the reader enjoys. And then you can pile on all these other things to maybe, hopefully, give it relevance or depth or some kind of resonance, which is what we all want to do. But but I feel like you have to start out with what makes a novel engaging, or else you're going to get into trouble.
I agree with you entirely, and I certainly think that you have succeeded. Certainly your peer acclaim and your readers would agree with that. So I want to thank you very much for all the joy you have brought to me, and
thank you.
Thank you for coming today. It has been fun, and I hope all of you who are watching it with the Criminal Calendar today have had just as good a time.